to the Via Podcast. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. I cannot wait to get into today's episode. We are talking about roadside attractions.
What do you know about roadside attraction?
Well, I know that sometimes the attractions that you stop at or see on the side of the road are even more memorable than the destination itself. So how about you, Mitty? Do you ever stop at roadside attractions?
Let me think about that. I can't say that I have. I kind of get a weird feeling like, why would I stop at something in the middle of nowhere? I think the only thing that I have up my sleeve is like, I don't know, venturing off to go find a strawberry farm or something. That's all I got. What about you?
That counts. I feel like I'm a sucker for if I see a sign that says, the thing in 10 miles. Like, I want to know what that is. I have such a fear of missing out. So I am so excited to talk to someone who has really made roadside attractions his entire career. Dylan Thuras is the co-founder and creative director of AtlasObscura.com, the collaborative guide to the world's hidden wonders. He's the co-author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, Atlas Obscura, Gastro Obscura, and The Explorer's Guide for the World's Most Adventurous Kid, which is in my Amazon cart right now. He's also the host of the popular travel podcast, the Atlas Obscura podcast, which has released more than 500 episodes.
Dylan, I cannot believe you made time for us. You are a busy man. Dylan Thuras, welcome to the Via Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you too.
So we're talking about roadside attractions today. And Michelle and I were talking about this earlier because we looked through so many lists and so many things of roadside attractions, and we couldn't believe that we did not know that they existed. You had a soft spot for roadside attractions. Can you please tell us, how did this come about? Like, were you just driving down the road and it's like, wow, look at that random building in the middle of nowhere?
So I think it all goes back to as many things, to my childhood. As I tell my therapist. When I was growing up, I grew up in Minneapolis. My family is all from the Midwest. And so a lot of my trips, like the big summer trips we would take, would be these like giant, epic, 700-mile road trips through South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin. And while this may not sound to people like the most exotic travel experience, I beg to differ. We did so many crazy, interesting things on those trips. And I think my parents also had a taste for maybe weird or quirky kind of travel stops. And on one of these trips, we went to a place in Wisconsin that I've been back maybe 5 or 6 times, a place called the House on the Rock.
Okay.
And it comes with a mythology, which is that supposedly the guy who built it wanted to work for Frank Lloyd Wright, who was working in the area building a building called Taliesin. So he went to Frank Lloyd Wright and showed him his drawings. And Frank Lloyd Wright said, I would not hire you to build a cheese crate or a chicken coop. And sent him packing.
Well, it must have been pretty bad. And that's not Midwestern nice, by the way.
Yeah.
So it was bad.
No, it is not. Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, a notoriously not Midwesternly nice person. The myth's amazing. Almost 100% not true. However, this guy builds a house.
Okay.
Very much like in the style of Frank Lloyd Wright, and then starts adding on it more and more and more over the course of decades and decades and decades, to the point where it takes about 6 hours to walk through the house.
Wow.
It has the world's largest indoor carousel. It has this hallway that's made to look like it goes on for infinity. It's this giant spire that shoots out over the forest and gets narrower and narrower and narrower.
That's crazy. It's like a fun house on steroids.
Yeah, and inside there is a sculpture of a squid fighting a whale the size of the Statue of Liberty inside of the house. So as a 12-year-old, I was just like, what if this is here? Like, if this is out in the woods of Wisconsin, like, what else is out there in the world? So that's where I fell in love with this kind of travel. And I like all kinds of travel, but I still love a big road trip.
That makes sense. And shout out to your parents for an incredible memory.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. What defines a roadside attraction, and how many roadside attractions do you think you visited?
Oh, those are, I don't actually know the answer to that second question. I mean, I have a count on Atlas that's in the 500s, but I stopped, it's like way under.
Okay.
But I think I would guess maybe a couple hundred in the US of kind of roads, like really specifically roadside attractions. Defining a roadside attraction is so hard. It's usually not in a city, I would say. Like, I think that often I think of roadside attractions as being stuff that is outside of a major city center. You might not realize it's there until you're driving past it. You know, the famous ones are the big things, right? Like the Midwest is the land of the big things, the world's largest frying pan, the world's largest bass, you know, giant fiberglass bass you can walk inside of. So that's one category. There's a whole category of architecture out there where people like built a milk bottle and then sold milk out of it. Then there's like a whole other kind of category called like outsider art, where people start building something and they just dedicate their lives to building that thing.
Well, I'm just curious because if I'm driving along this random road, are we driving down the highway and you say, wow, that's a random shack? I think we should go see if that's a roadside attraction. Is that your thought process at all?
I'm just like knocking on people's doors. I'm like, what do you got in there? What's going on? Well, first off, we're probably not on the interstate. We're probably off the interstate.
Oh, okay.
You got to kind of get off the interstate to the smaller side roads. Normally, I know what I'm going to see, but it's true. Occasionally, you drive past something and you go, what was that? And then you have to like flip a Yui and go back and look. And normally it's better than just a shack.
Okay.
Presumably it's something that seems like it wants people to go look at it, but
like a rock, maybe more like a big rock in the middle of something.
Like a giant rock. We're going to talk about a very special, very amazing giant rock later in this episode.
Mitty and I were talking before that many roadside attractions involve rocks. That could probably be its own category because I feel like some of the ones we're going to talk about today and some of the other ones you mentioned, like they involve some sort of rock or that like natural.
Seriously.
Right?
Yeah.
Sort of there's something to that or it's just my own observation.
Maybe like I'm weirdly drawn to rocks.
It's fair.
Yeah. Once you get out in the desert, like what do you got? You got sand, you got rocks. Like, yeah.
Before we get into some of like your favorites, I'm just curious, is this like a secret society? Earlier, we talked to Maria Finn, who's a forager, and it seems as though you kind of have to be in the know. And like, it's not like I'm going to go on the dark web and look for roadside attractions. But is this a secret society of experiences?
Oh yeah, you know, we're like the Illuminati in a Chevrolet. You know, yeah.
Okay. Or a Subaru.
Yeah, it's a Subaru. In my case, it's 100% a Subaru Outback. Correct. Yeah. I do think, though, there is a kind of like opting in. Like sometimes you go to these places and you run into like 2 or 3 people there and you start chatting and it's like, oh yeah, I've been there, but have you been to this place? And like, it just becomes something that you make sure is planned into your travel, right? You just think, okay, we got to make time and go see that guy's crazy castle he built because I don't know when we're going to be here again. And then 9 out of 10 times, you're like, that was incredible and really worth it. 1 out of 10 times, you're like, wah, wah.
9 out of 10 that's not a bad average.
It's pretty good. Yeah. You're usually surprised by what you see in some really fundamental way.
Well, Dylan, you are an expert on all things roadside attractions.
Yeah.
We want you to take us on a road trip to see some of the best roadside attractions in the West. So where do you want to start?
Well, I will start by explaining how I chose these places. I had 2 criteria. One, I had to have been to it. There are plenty of great roadside attractions, you know, in Atlas Obscura, but I haven't been to yet. So I wanted to talk about stuff that I knew personally. 2, you know, I wanted to cover a few different states. So we're going to start in Colorado. We're going to go through Utah and then end in California. And the last criteria is it just so happened that on this trip, I found a bunch of places that are all sort of homes. Things that people built to live in, or they have a story about someone staying in them. And so each of them kind of has this theme. So that's how I thought about putting this together.
In the Subaru. So we're getting in Dylan's Subaru.
We have lots of snacks. I got 2 kids, so we have like 8 million of those little oranges, you know?
Oh, the cuties.
Cuties. We have like 9 bags of cuties. Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting in Colorado. What are we doing?
We are going kind of way up into the mountains in Colorado to start.
Ooh.
We're going to a town called Rye, Colorado. And we're going to a place that is unlike anywhere else I have ever been. It's a place called Bishop's Castle, and it is named after the guy who built it, Jim Bishop. You know, he's been doing this for his whole life. He started in the very late 1960s, early 1970s. And he decided that when it was time for them to get a house, he would just build it himself. So he was going to build a one-room stone cottage. But this is like the ultimate like DIY project that got out of hand. Today, the one-room stone cottage is a 16-story tall medieval castle built by one person. He built it by hand himself. Every stone he brought up there. It's got giant cathedral windows, like huge stained glass windows. He made these iron walkways, these bridges that he welded himself, 16 stories up from like one tower over to the other tower. And he's been building for 50 years. It's not like he had plans. Like he just started, put stone on stone on stone on stone. Mm-hmm. So I went to this place in the winter and it was like everything was covered in snow. You walked in, you sign a waiver that basically says, if I die, it's my fault and not yours.
Oh, wow. This castle is not up to code.
This castle is not up to code.
So we're not talking about a Disney castle here. Like we're talking about the antithesis of a Disney castle. It looks like a castle that you would see in a Tim Burton movie.
It does have a slightly spooky gothic vibe to it. But also because it's like, it's unfurnished. Mm-hmm. He never did move in because he's not done building it.
And maybe a little haunted, a little bit?
Oh, it's haunted by the sense of your imminent death. No, it's so cool. It's really, really amazing. And actually, feels quite safe walking around the castle. I went out on the wrought iron walkways, like 16 stories up. That felt a little sketchier because they like move in the wind and you're like, oh, some guy just like welded this in his free time. Like, all right.
Yes, so true.
But people have been going there for a long time. And there's a metal dragon that breathes fire. It didn't do it when we were there because he's got to be there to operate it. But he's got like big acetylene tanks and it's like he presses a button and...
So it actually breathes fire?
Yeah, like legit breathes fire.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. This was like a thing that, feels like it rivals most of the major tourist sites that I've been to in the world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there completely on our own, just exploring, looking around, being like, it's just unbelievable that somebody did this effectively single-handedly. So that's where we're starting. And it's near some other great stuff. It's near Royal Gorge, which is just an incredible park. This bridge spanning this unbelievable chasm. The bridge like moves a ton in the wind and like it's kind of crazy to walk across because it's like bouncing up and down. And,
okay.
Royal Gorge Park is really worth a stop and not too far away. You could go through Netherland, which is a beautiful town. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different ways to drive through that area, and it's incredible. It's all fantastic.
Before we move on, would you say, is there a best time or worst time to travel?
I think you're more likely to run into Jim and have a conversation about the castle. Summer or the warm months are probably the best time, although he's quite old now and I think ill, so it's not clear whether he'll be there or not. But, honestly, stop by, and I would say stop by sooner rather than later because when he passes away, I think it's really unclear who will like take over the castle, like whether it will be, there's not like a landmarking operation for crazy outsider art, right? It often disappears when the creator passes away. So I'm a little worried about what happens to the castle in the future. So hopefully the state will figure out a way, or the town will figure out a way to keep it around.
So we're leaving Colorado, and where are we heading next?
We are going to go to Utah. We're going to go to just outside of Moab. There's a state park called Dead Horse State Park, which maybe doesn't sound...
Michelle's favorite.
We talked about that.
Oh, did you? Oh, nice.
We did.
So like, for me, that's like a perfect example because like Arches gets crazy busy, right? And Arches is so beautiful, but like if you're there during the high season, it's like, man, I don't know, like you better be willing to hike far in to get away from the crowds. But just outside of Moab, though, is another of these really unusual, interesting residences. And this to me is a quintessential roadside attraction. It's called not the House on the Rock, but the Hole in the Rock. And you'll know you're going by it because the words hole in N with a little thing.
Not in, I-N.
N, just N. Hole in the Rock painted like 20 feet high on the side of this giant bluff. What it is another, I guess, like a fellow traveler of Jim Bishop, in the sense that this guy, Albert Christensen, he just decided that the place he wanted to live was like inside of this rock. And so he spent 12 years carving, blasting, building, and then he moved his family into this home. And he lived there through the 50s. He died in the end of the 50s, and his wife lived there for many years after. She died in the 70s. And they're buried on the grounds, actually. This is their home.
Oh,
But
wow.
what's kind of cool about it, it's got 14 rooms, by the way. He was like not slacking off. He built a big, crazy space. It's all these, huge pillars are like in the middle of the rooms. And then what's I think so great about it is it's still furnished like it was back then.
Oh,
it's got
cool.
like 50s, 60s couches, chairs, tables. It has a taxidermied pet donkey who I think was his. I think was Albert's. And then
Like his actual pet, and it's now...
I think so. I think it was his pet that then he, immortalized.
That's different.
That does not surprise me that he had a pet donkey.
Of course. So you got to carry rocks somehow, right? It's like, yeah. It's a really unique spot with really interesting kind of personal family story behind it, which I really am attracted to these kinds of places. You're just like, oh, you set your mind to doing this thing that like sounds kind of crazy and then did it. And you ended up making this kind of incredible contribution to the world. And a thing that people still come and look at and marvel today. So I'm a big fan. So Hole in the Rock is our next stop.
So Dylan, nobody lives at Hole in the Rock now.
Yeah.
Can you take us through walking into it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Take us there.
Yeah. Okay. So you approach this massive bluff with the words Hole in the Rock written on it. And then carved into the side is a memorial, a face. And there, FDR's face stares out at you from the rock, carved into the rock.
Carved
into the
carved
bluff.
in
Yes,
the rock.
directly into the bluff. So that you see that. And then curiously, like, there's just like normal, like French windows, like underneath that, like because he found rock where it opened up to the outside.
Okay.
So they have this house in the rock has windows and a normal door and shrubbery. There's a garden, like a little cactus garden. You go in and then you start to see all the different layouts of the rooms. You see the taxidermy donkey, who's named Harry, by the way. That's like the first thing.
I was going to ask if the donkey had a name.
The donkey is named Harry. It's a weirdly laid out home because, like I say, rooms. And it's more like cavern sections. Like they're not super divided from each other. It's a relatively open space. I think the rooms were more mental than necessarily fully obvious. But like you can see, okay, this is like a living room. That's a kitchen. You see the old couches. You see there's a fireplace inside with like knickknacks built up on the side of it. Like you definitely feel like I could stay here. Like that seems nice.
It just doesn't seem comfortable. And I just don't understand how you get a kitchen and electricity inside a rock. I mean, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I'm literally thinking about the Flintstones.
I don't know, Mitty, it sounds open concept to me. Like it just sounds like they were ahead of their time. They were really pioneers in the space of now we have these open concept homes.
That's right.
Is there electricity, Wi-Fi, comforts of any sort?
I believe there is electricity today for sure. I'm not sure when it was added, but there is electricity. Unclear about Wi-Fi.
All right, Dylan, what is next on our route?
We're going to go to California, out to the truly bizarre landscape that is Death Valley. And we're going to visit in this nothing of a town. Like there's so little there. Is this place called the Armagosa Opera House, which does in fact put on operas. It does put on shows, and again is the pursuit of one kind of eccentric person who wanted to take what was kind of a dead town and turn it into something beautiful and spectacular. So it's this woman named Marta Beckett. This was a town that was a mining town, but had basically been left in the 60s. Like they ran out of stuff, the miners left. And so Marta shows up, and this town is truly a ghost town. And Marta was from New York City. So she was like, okay, what am I going to do out here? She'd been a dancer and a performer her whole life. And she realized, I'm going to leave New York. I'm going to come live in Death Valley. And saw this building, this old theater. And she thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make this place and performing here my life. She would put on, I think they were nightly shows in the Opera House. And at first, basically no one came. The first performance, 12 people were there.
I mean, that's the population of the town, if I'm
Yes,
right.
correct. Yeah, so in a way, it's a great turnout. But so she felt like, oh, I don't have an audience. Like, I can take this, I can turn it into an opera house, and I can perform, but I need an audience. So she began painting an audience, and she covered the walls in this royal audience. It's all sort of kings and queens from the 16th century. There are bullfighters and monks and nuns. There are every kind of character, and just thousands of faces peering out from the walls.
So she was like, build it and they will come. And if they don't come, I will paint them on the walls and I will still perform.
Correct. And took her 4 years to do the walls, and then she did the ceilings. She turned this empty, abandoned theater into this grand opera house. She paints it in this way that makes it totally unique. And people start coming and attending performances. And so she sort of wills this thing into being. And it's still there today. I believe they still put on shows there, throughout the year. And so, the Armagosa Opera House is a really cool, special spot.
And is there anything else out there besides the Opera House? There are like 0 restaurants, 20 people live there maybe. Is there even a gas station?
No. No. But you are really close to Death Valley National Park. You're really, really close. So usually I think people see the Opera House when they're visiting Death Valley. And it's definitely worth the little detour.
Okay.
So we're going to keep going, and we're going to go to one of the greatest areas in the country for roadside attractions and for road tripping in general, which is the Southern California, Palm Springs, Joshua Tree area. You probably can see a roadside attraction at any given vantage point for like that whole stretch. One of the things you drive by on your way there is the Cabazon dinosaurs, these giant dinosaurs from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yes.
Oh,
we were talking about that.
So that's there. You stop there. There's a truly classic roadside attraction. There's so much good stuff to stop at. The World Crochet Museum is in Joshua Tree.
That's on my list.
It's a good one.
I was telling Michelle this because I don't know. I think her name is Sherry Elf.
I know Sherry really well. Yeah.
Which is her real last name. Side note, I love Joshua Tree. It is the place that my sorority and sisters and we love. We try to make it an annual trip. But I was so upset because we didn't know any of this existed. Then you see this crazy lime green building of the Crochet Museum. And by the way, Sherry does not know how to crochet, but she's an avid learner and she's just so honest about wanting to learn. And I think what stuck out to me was the fact that the people behind these roadside attractions are just as interesting as the roadside attractions themselves.
100%. 100%.
Sometimes even more interesting, maybe.
Yes, like Sherry, I'm sure.
Could not agree with this more. Like the people you meet, the people behind this stuff, that is such a deep part of what you're there for. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's worth checking out. But I'm going to send you out into the desert. In fact, I'm going to send you on like a little bit of a sketchy drive because you got to go, you're going out into the Bureau of Land Management land. There aren't really roads. You're out on the sand. So you're kind of following tracks. Like you're like, okay, this seems like the right direction. There's tracks here. And you get to something called Giant Rock. So one more rock, and I promise this is the last rock.
Always a rock.
So, well, they rock. It's first off, it's the scale of it is just crazy. It's like, what is it? 8 stories tall.
Wow.
It's 6,000 square feet, and it's believed to be the largest freestanding boulder in the world. But
we don't know that, right? Because
it's true. It's true. Always be suspicious of every superlative. Largest, longest, oldest.
Allegedly. We can say it's allegedly.
Allegedly, yes.
Allegedly.
Yes.
There we go.
But would you argue if it doesn't have that, you shouldn't go? If it doesn't have the world's largest, strangest...
have some ambition,
whatever.
people. You gotta... You're making roadside attractions here. You can't, you got to have something going for you.
You got to sell it.
We're here at Giant Rock. We're at the largest rock, the largest freestanding boulder. And there's a lot of story here. It's got Native American spiritual significance that goes back thousands of years. It's an unmissable landmark in the desert. But then it has this very strange story that starts in the 1930s when, again, you get another very strange person, a guy named Frank Kritzer, who is a miner, made friends with a relatively rich pilot named George Van Tassel. And they became really good friends. And Van Tassel, the rich pilot, loans the miner money because this guy, Frank Kritzer, wants to build his home underneath Giant Rock. His plan is to dig under this rock and build a little house under there. And so that's exactly what he does. He builds himself a little kind of one-story hangout shack, whatever, underneath the rock. He was also a radio enthusiast, so he would go up in the mountains and use his radio. He was German. He was an immigrant. And this meant that during World War II, people started to suspect he was a spy. Oh. Because he was German, weirdo guy out in the desert, up in the mountains with a big radio set. He's like a crazy, cranky old miner who lives under a giant rock. Like, this builds and builds and builds. And we don't know the exact details, but eventually the police go to get him out of this house. They get into some kind of altercation, and they think that one of the police shot a tear gas canister into his home. He had all this mining equipment in there, like explosive caps, and it blew up and it killed him.
No. That's so sad.
And he was not a spy. He just was a weirdo who lived under a rock. So this is this crazy story, and it's sort of part one, because then part two is that his friend, this guy George Van Tassel, is like really upset by this. He's sort of heartbroken. He's really disturbed by it. And he sort of becomes obsessed with this kind of these spiritual, weird ideas about aliens. And while he is holding a meditation session in Kritzer's old home underneath Giant Rock, he gets a communication from aliens. Like he has this moment where he's like, I am being spoken to. I think they were Venusians. I think they're aliens from Venus. Okay. But he's like, I am getting told what to do. And he starts organizing the first like big UFO conventions ever at Giant Rock. They're amazing. It's like all these 50s cool cats in their sunglasses and their suits out at next to this crazy enormous rock, like listening to conferences about extraterrestrials. And then he also goes on to build this other nearby project called the Integratron, which is this kind of sound bath. You go inside of it and you experience the vibrations of all of the sound, and it heals you and it connects you to the extraterrestrial universe. And anyway, the whole place is this site of this kind of very weird, kind of profound, really amazing history. And I love the kind of slightly out there vibes all around the whole thing, but like it's awesome. The Integratron is awesome. Giant Rock is awesome. And the history of the whole place is just like worth learning about. So
you had said we're in the Death Valley, Palm Springs area. Where specifically is Giant Rock?
We're in Landers, California. So we are
perfect.
South of Joshua Tree.
So are we talking like an hour?
I want to say it's probably a half-hour drive out of Joshua Tree. I think that's about right.
Okay.
Maybe 45 minutes.
That's not bad.
It's not crazy. It's not crazy. It's a doable trip if you're out there. People come from around the world to see every single one of these places that we're talking about. And so I just think there's something really beautiful about that strange sort of that dedication to a vision that maybe only you can see. But on the other side, like everyone actually does see it because you've committed so deeply. So I love places like that.
All right, Dylan, we have one more stop on our road trip with you.
Yes. So once you're on the coast of California, once you're on that West Coast, Highway 1 drive, there's so many incredible places to go. Like it's an embarrassment of riches. So many good things. But in keeping with our theme and not letting the road trip get too crazy out of hand, we are just going to go up to San Luis Obispo in California. So a little bit up the coast. And we're going to stop at what is maybe the all-time good taste, bad taste hotel. It is the craziest, kitschiest, most overdone Rococo decor in the best possible way. So we're going to go to a place called the Madonna Inn. Are either of you familiar with the Madonna Inn? Or?
So I'm so glad you asked that.
Yes.
We both thought it had something to do with Madonna the singer.
And when you look at the pictures, it could.
It could. You're right. It could be a music video. A Madonna music video could be set at the Madonna Inn. That is 100% accurate.
In every room, by the way.
Yeah. There's a famous writer.
Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because I'm about to read this quote, which is the best way to describe the Madonna Inn.
Okay.
There's a famous writer named Umberto Eco who does like really high-end literature. He's like a very fancy fellow. And he went to the Madonna Inn and he said it was as if someone, while leafing through a book on Gaudi, swallowed an overdose of LSD and began a nuptial catacomb for Liza Minnelli. And like, that's right.
Spot on.
Yeah. It's a 109-room hotel. Every single room is its own theme room. So if you can think about the sort of kitschy theme room hotel, this is that to the absolute maximum. So the rooms are called things like Floral Fantasy or Jungle Rock or Whispering Hills. And they're all themed, like they're all color-coded and made to that kind of stuff. And none of them are like, it's not like the Star Wars room or like it. No. These are sort of just weird, obscure vibes. Like it's just like strange, cushy couches and velour and
zebra print, I think.
Bright zebra print, bright
lots of
pink
prints.
Couch cushion. Like it is like it's not cheap because like people. I mean, it has a really dedicated fan base. People love the Madonna Inn. People get married there. They have their honeymoon there.
Wow.
But even if you're not doing any of that stuff, just go and like get a meal in the restaurant. Use the bathroom. The downstairs bathroom is like very famous because it's this kind of waterfall, like urinal system. Like you press the button and then it's like water comes out of the wall. It's crazy.
And it is water.
Yes, it is water. I'm 90% sure of that. And it's a family-run place. Like I think the family still owns and operates it. It's
That's
a good
cool.
one.
Dylan, we talked about a lot of places, a lot of stops, but we have to ask, what are some reasons to stop at a place that has no educational or edifying value like a place at Madonna?
Mitty, I strongly disagree with you about your statement there. No.
Okay.
I mean, edifying at the least, if not educational. I think all of these places, these kinds of places, they tell you something, obviously, about the person who built them, but also they're not only built by interesting people, but they attract interesting people. When you go to these places, you run into interesting folks who are sort of taking a more interesting trip. These aren't folks who are just saying, all right, we got to get, from New York to LA and we're going to blast through in, 5 days and it's just interstate. Like, that's fine if that's what you need to do. But I think the people who take a little bit of extra time to go sort of on the back roads, out of the way, to seek out these weird and interesting places, to just have some surprising experiences, to let a little bit of serendipity into your life,
Yeah.
It's so freeing, and it really gives you that sense of discovery and excitement and joy that I associate with travel and road trips, And for me, that is both edifying and educational.
You know what? You proved me wrong.
Yeah. I love these kinds of places. I think they're really special, and I think it's worth celebrating them.
Well, we appreciate that you celebrate them, and we appreciate that you celebrated them with us today. Dylan, thank you so much for being on the Via podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
All right, Mitty, it's time to hear from our listeners.
I love how engaged our listeners are.
They know a lot. We talk to these experts and then we hear from the listeners, and the listeners have some amazing places for us to check out that relate to each episode. So our first email comes from AAA member Shauna W. from Nevada. Shauna writes, "The painted rock towers of Seven Magic Mountains in Nevada are an unexpected bright spot on the road to Las Vegas. Their Crayola-like colors and forms pique curiosity. They make a great backdrop for photos, and they bring out the silly in all of us. We offered to take photos of a group of women in their 70s, and they giggled and posed like teenagers in front of the rocks. It's a happy place."
I love that. It's kind of like what Dylan said. When you see these roadside attractions up close, it just brings out something so happy and so joyous out of you.
I think so too. We also heard from AAA member Diane Wynn from California. Diane writes, "My favorite roadside attraction in the West is the family-owned Prehistoric Gardens in Oregon. It's just a simple loop near Port Orford's gorgeous beach, but the dinosaurs and details are all scientifically accurate. Nearby, there's a fantastic little lighthouse and a gentle seaside trail at Cape Blanco State Park and the Crazy Norwegians Fish and Chips, a famous spot in Port Orford. The area reminded me of New Zealand, but a whole lot closer."
I don't know if it gets better than lighthouse and dinosaurs and fish and chips, which is something that I enjoy.
She just checked all the boxes for you, Mitty.
She did.
I think
I'll see you soon, Oregon.
Yes. I think my biggest takeaway from this episode is, to your point, these roadside attractions are not things that are major itinerary items, but they invite that serendipity, as Dylan mentioned, and it really invites that inner joy to come out, right? It makes us all feel like kind of kids again and enriches all of our travel experiences.
I'm a believer in roadside attractions.
Love your comments, questions, and especially your stories about travel in the West. Send us an email at viamagazine.com. Again, that email is viamagazine.com. You can also leave us a voicemail at 415-475-9350. Again, that phone number is 415-475-9350.
And don't be shy. You may hear your voicemail played on the podcast.
The VIA podcast is hosted by Mitty Hicks and Michelle Donati. That's me.
Produced by Whitney Fanoof, editor-in-chief of VIA. Katie Henry, managing editor of VIA. And editorial consultant April Kilcrease. Alongside Dave Beasing and Jason Jackson of Sound That Brands.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the VIA podcast. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Discover more places to travel in the West at AAA.com/VIA. VIA Magazine is published by AAA Mountain West Group.
The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of AAA Mountain West Group or its personnel.